In January of 2004, a package arrived at a television station in Wichita, Kansas. Inside was a manila envelope. Inside that envelope was a photocopy of a driver's license, a piece of jewelry, some photographs, and a handwritten letter signed with 3 letters, BTK. The newsroom went quiet, because everyone in Wichita knew what those letters meant. They had known for 30 years. Bind, torture, kill. It was the name a serial killer had given himself in the 1970s, a killer who had murdered at least 10 people, vanished without a trace, and was widely believed to be dead. But he wasn't dead. He was very much alive, and for reasons that no psychologist has been able to fully explain to this day, he had decided to come back. This is the story of Dennis Rader, a man who committed unthinkable crimes, disappeared into the ordinary world for 3 decades, and then made the single most inexplicable decision in the history of American serial killing. He came back on his own, and it cost him everything. To understand what happened in 2004, you have to go back to January 15, 1974, a Sunday morning in Wichita, Kansas. A family named Otero didn't show up to church. That alone wasn't alarming. But a neighbor's son, asked by the family to check in, walked to the house on Edgemoor Lane and found the front door unlocked. He pushed it open. I won't describe what he found. What I'll tell you is that investigators arrived at a scene that left seasoned detectives speechless. Joseph Otero, his wife Julie, their 11-year-old son Joey, their 9-year-old daughter Josie. All 4 members of the same family, all in the same house, all gone. The manner of the deaths pointed to something methodical, controlled, someone who had taken their time. There was no sign of forced entry, which meant the killer had likely knocked on the door, had been let inside, had been for at least a moment trusted. Police had almost nothing, no weapon, no witnesses, no suspect, no explanation for why this particular family had been chosen. Joseph Otero was a former Air Force man who had recently returned from Panama. Investigators initially theorized a connection to his military past, some enemy from overseas. They were wrong. The truth was far more disturbing. He had been chosen almost at random. The killer had driven through the neighborhood. He had watched several houses. The Otero family simply happened to be home. Over the next 4 years, he struck again and again. Catherine Bright, a 21-year-old woman, attacked in her own home. Shirley Vian, a young mother whose children were locked in a closet during the attack so they wouldn't have to see. Nancy Fox, 25 years old, killed in her bedroom. Maureen Hedge, a woman who lived just down the block from the killer himself, though nobody knew that yet. Each time, investigators found the same signature, the same deliberate methodology, the same evidence of someone who had planned carefully, moved without panic, and left almost nothing behind. But then something unusual happened. He started writing letters. In October of 1974, a letter was discovered at the Wichita Public Library, written by the killer himself, describing the Otero murders in detail that only the perpetrator could know, taunting investigators, describing himself, and then, almost as an afterthought, asking a question. How many people do I have to kill before I get some attention in the paper or on TV? Investigators were shaken, not just by the letter itself, but by the mind behind it. This wasn't someone acting on pure impulse. This was someone who wanted to be known, who had a sense of theater, who experienced his crimes not just as acts of violence, but as performances that required an audience. A psychologist who reviewed the letters described the writer as someone with an overwhelming need for recognition, a deep, compulsive hunger to be seen as exceptional, as someone set apart from ordinary people. That profile would turn out to be one of the most accurate in the history of criminal psychology. And then, in 1979, he went quiet. One final letter, one final taunt, and then nothing. For 25 years, nothing. No killings that could be attributed to him. No letters, no contact. The case went cold. Investigators who had spent years hunting him retired. Some died. New generations of detectives inherited a file with no new leads. The city of Wichita slowly, cautiously exhaled. But here is the thing about Dennis Rader that makes this case unlike almost any other in criminology. While investigators were searching for a phantom, the phantom was living next door. Dennis Rader was a husband, a father of 2 children. He was president of his local Lutheran church congregation, a position chosen by a vote from his fellow church members, people who trusted him, who admired his organizational skills and his reliability. He was a compliance officer for the city of Park City, Kansas, a job that involved inspecting properties and enforcing local codes. He was by every external measure an unremarkable pillar of the community. He coached Boy Scouts, he volunteered, he gave sermons, and for 30 years he got up every morning and went to church and went to work and came home to his family. 30 years of silence, 30 years of an ordinary life. Either he had simply stopped, or he had found a way to live inside both worlds, simultaneously the world everyone saw and the world no one could imagine. To this day, psychologists disagree about which explanation is more disturbing. Then 2004 arrived, and something shifted inside him. A book was published about the BTK murders. A television special revisited the case, and Dennis Rader, now in his late 50s, a grandfather figure in his community, began to feel something he hadn't felt in decades. He wanted to be recognized again. He started writing letters, dropping packages, leaving items at locations around Wichita. Each communication was a puzzle, a taunt, a deliberate test of investigators' ability to keep up with him. He seemed to believe he was untouchable, that 30 years of silence had made him invisible, that he had successfully become someone else entirely, and that his other self could never be connected to what he had done. He was meticulous. He knew that physical evidence was dangerous. He was careful about what he touched, what he left behind, but he made one question, a single, almost casual inquiry that would unravel everything. In February of 2005, he sent investigators a floppy disk. On it was a document he had written, and before sending it, he had deleted the file, believing that deletion meant erasure. What he didn't know, or had forgotten, was that deleted files leave traces, that the metadata of a document holds information the naked eye cannot see. Forensic investigators recovered the file's metadata in less than an hour. The document had been last edited at Christ Lutheran Church. The registered user was listed as a single name, Dennis. On February 25, 2005, Dennis Rader was pulled over on a road near his home. Investigators had positioned themselves carefully. They were almost certain. But almost is not certainty, and they needed to be sure. They were sure within minutes. Rader was calm during the arrest, eerily calm. He didn't run, didn't struggle. There are accounts from investigators present that day that describe his demeanor as almost relieved, as if some part of him, some deep, exhausted part, had finally been allowed to stop holding everything together. His wife of 34 years had no idea. His adult children had no idea. His church congregation had no idea. At his sentencing, the judge asked him how he wanted to be remembered. Rader answered thoughtfully as if he had prepared. He spoke about his family, his community, his church work. He seemed to genuinely believe that these things existed separately from what he had done, that the man his family knew was real, and the other part of him was something else entirely, a separate entity, a passenger. Psychologists who examined him described a level of compartmentalization so complete that it had functioned, for decades, as its own kind of reality. He is currently serving 10 consecutive life sentences in the El Dorado Correctional Facility in Kansas. He will never be released. But here is the question that lingers, the one that investigators, psychologists, and criminologists have never been able to fully resolve. Why did he come back? He was safe. He had been safe for 25 years. No evidence pointed to him. No witness had ever seen his face. He had successfully transformed himself into a completely different person, one so ordinary and so trusted that the idea of him being a killer would have seemed genuinely laughable to everyone who knew him. He came back anyway. Some experts argue it was ego, the need for recognition so total and so consuming that even safety, even freedom, couldn't satisfy it, that he would rather be known for what he was than remain invisible in who he had become. Others argue something stranger, that the double life had become unbearable, that 30 years of being seen as ordinary, of being respected and liked and trusted for entirely the wrong reasons, had created a pressure he couldn't sustain, that the letters weren't taunts. They were confessions looking for a witness. And a few experts argue the most unsettling theory of all, that he genuinely believed he would never be caught, that the letters were a game he was certain he would win, that the arrogance ran so deep it had become indistinguishable from delusion. Dennis Rader himself has never given a satisfying answer. In interviews from prison, he discusses his crimes with the same organized, methodical manner he used to plan them. He uses clinical language, he draws charts. He seems more interested in being understood as a subject of study than in expressing anything resembling remorse. The people who knew him, who sat next to him in church, whose children played with his children, have described the experience of learning the truth as something that permanently altered their understanding of what a person can be, not what a monster looks like, because he didn't look like a monster. He looked like everyone else. That may be the most disturbing thing about this case, not what he did, but how completely, how convincingly, how effortlessly he became someone who would never do such a thing. And nobody knew. For 30 years, nobody knew. What does that say about how well we can truly know another person? I'll let you sit with that.